Okay, thank you, Sayyid Hassan. Okay, inshallah, let's get started. Please, at any time, again, just like we did last week, if you have any questions, any comments, anything you guys want to discuss, anything you feel like saying, please do feel free to just take up the mic or message in the chat. Inshallah, what I want to do right now is I want to first quickly recap what I had given as homework. So, an interesting point about what we had discussed last week, and then we will now enter the discussion on epistemology. I'll talk a little bit about what is epistemology, and inshallah, what is the plan for the upcoming sessions, how we will be going through this subject. So, what I had given as homework was to compare these four different approaches. Initially, in the last week's session, we had focused on the fourth approach. And if you remember, we had talked about how it was kind of our way of entering this discussion of principles of beliefs, usul aqaid. We entered this discussion about how it's important to kind of investigate religion. Why? Because religion is a path to happiness, pleasure. I just wanted to give some comments about how this is one way that Islam teaches us, the intellect teaches us that we can somehow approach religion, that religion, it's true. Religion is a means of attaining happiness and pleasure that is, even more, much, much more pleasurable and strong than the material happiness that the dunya gives us, the world gives us. However, this is one approach that Muslims have taken to introduce religion and to somehow, first of all, attract people to religious discussions and invite them to religion. Some other ways, and the book that I was using to prepare is somehow claiming that these other ways are not as appropriate in today's world. Okay, so inshallah, I'll hear if any of you guys have any comments. But the other ways are, first of all, to say that following religion is the cause of perfection. All of these ways are true. All of these ways are definitely in line with the intellect, with the Quran and Hadith. But the criticism here is that for your average person who's not interested in religion, who doesn't know anything about Islamic philosophy, they won't really know what perfection is. They don't care about perfection. Unless they have somehow made that link between perfection and happiness, which is not going to be the case initially, right? Unless they've made that link, this is not that big of a deal to them to say that religion is the cause of perfection. So what? Like, I don't want that perfection, they might say. As opposed to that, the pleasure, the way that we talked about happiness and pleasure, that is something that is in the fitrah of everybody. From when they are a child, we are all seeking happiness, we are all seeking pleasure. That's something very broad, encompassing the dunya and the akhirah. It's a concept that, like really would impel and encourage somebody to investigate religion. So that was kind of a criticism of the first approach, was that perfection is this complicated concept most people don't understand. A criticism of the second concept is that um, it's just okay. So the second concept is what is scaring people, saying, "Oh, hell is waiting for you if you don't look into religion. You could get in trouble." Again, this is there in Hadith. This is there in, it's definitely an intellectual argument that there is harm in ignoring religion. But the criticism here is that in the modern world, people don't like to hear such things. Okay, we live in the culture of the West, people are more inclined to discussions about happiness and love and harmony. If you start talking about evil and punishment and getting in trouble, people won't like that, and people won't welcome such an argument. Okay. The third and final, because we already talked about the fourth one, the third and final way is that this idea in Arabic, they would say giving shukr, doing shukr to the mun'im, the one who gave us ni'mah, that Allah blessed us in our life, Allah created us, gave us existence. It is only appropriate that we give thanks to Him by worshipping, by following. Again, the criticism here is that that's not so natural. Following happiness, following pleasure is something very natural. It's in our fitrah. To now try to give thanks to somebody else by worshiping, by following, it's not that strong of an inclination that human beings have. Somebody might say, okay, I didn't want to be created. God chose to create me. Why do I have to now give thanks to him? So all of these arguments, the claim that's being made here is that the best argument that we can use to attract people to religion is to tell them this idea that religion is the means of true happiness. I'll pause here if you guys, to be honest, I didn't get a chance to look at your responses to the homework. Inshallah, I will read it in detail. But right now, if anybody has any comments, if anybody doesn't agree with this claim that is being made that the fourth is the best way, then I'm happy to hear briefly, inshallah, from you guys. Does everybody agree with this? Would you guys all say that number four is the most, if you were at the workplace talking to a non-Muslim, would you feel more comfortable trying to engage them with this fourth way that religion is a means of happiness and pleasure? I think Brother Muhammad Ali gave us a thumbs up, so he agrees. Anybody else?
In my response, in my response to the question, which is more detailed, I'll just kind of summarize it here. I think I
Bismillah.
argued that if you think about, the fourth argument is talking about the inner kind of inward happiness or the kind of the batin of happiness. And from
Mm-hmm.
that perspective, basically what four is saying, and if you kind of take out the worldly happiness, then what I argued in my response is fourth then becomes one actually, because it is kind of
Mm-hmm.
that perfection that it's taking you towards, because you can look beyond kind of the veil of the world.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're right. But the only thing is that to make that connection from four to one is not straightforward, maybe. Awesome, awesome. Okay, inshallah. If
Yeah,
nobody else, yeah,
yeah,
Bismillah.
Sheikh.
What?
Um,
Bismillah.
could you kindly, I agree, more pleasure would appeal, especially living in this kind of life. But could
Mm-hmm.
you give us some examples of what we can say? Like, how can having a religious approach gives you more pleasure? What examples can you give? Or maybe if you can share something.
Sure, sure. It's this idea. Last week, I think I gave a story of Ayatollah Jamaluddin Gul Paygani, that he was an old man, sick, poor, but he had Allah in his life. He
Right.
was, was happy to do dua and he was crying as he was doing dua. There's this idea that human beings are not just a material, physical animal. We have a soul, we have a need to connect to Allah. If we don't do that, we will be unhappy in our life. You can try to mask or veil that unhappiness with worldly pleasures, but at certain times that soul will maybe, it will somehow trouble you that you're not fulfilling that need that you have, that spiritual need that you have.
I was also thinking because we have so much mental health problems now
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that can be tied to this in the sense that most people who have mental health, well, most places living in a world where there's everything around them, but yet
yeah,
there's
yeah,
so much suffering. And so that hasn't solved the problem, having everything available and material things. So,
definitely,
yeah.
definitely. Ahsant. Okay, thank you all for, inshallah, your responses that you did send that I will look at later, inshallah. For now, let's now enter the discussion on epistemology. Okay, so I'm gonna first of all just define what epistemology is, and then, I'll give you a moment to think about why would it be the case that we are starting a lengthy, inshallah, course in Islamic beliefs. If we do get the tawfiq to continue to discuss Allah and the soul and imamat and nubuwa, all these beautiful things, why are we starting with epistemology? First of all, what does epistemology mean? It comes from the Greek word epistem, meaning knowledge, and logos, meaning the study of knowledge. The Farsi equivalent would be ma'arifat shanasi. This idea of, I will soon, inshallah, tell you kind of the main questions we will tackle. But for now, just, this idea of what is our knowledge and where does our knowledge come from and how much can we depend on our knowledge? What do you guys think? Why is it important if we want to dive deep into our beliefs? Somebody might claim that, okay, the Ahlul Bayt, the Quran, we don't have a chapter of hadith called, I don't know, epistemology, whatever the Arabic equivalent is. Why do we as Muslims need to worry about it? What do you think? Anybody have any thoughts here before I give you the answer? Why is it important to start beliefs in a discussion on epistemology? You can also feel free to type in the chat if anybody's more comfortable doing that.
Can I take a stab at it?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Like I'm not 100% sure, but I feel um like epistemology is like it's almost like the reality of knowledge from my understanding. And you have to study like what are the different ways or the different types of knowledge? What are the different categories of knowledge and like its sort. And that can kind of help you understand when you do learn something, what kind of knowledge is it that you're taking in, and then you're able to put it in a level for you to know, okay, is this important or is this not as important? And if you learn the types of knowledge, then you're kind of able to take the information that you gain and put it in its place. And once you've put it in its place, then you can easily access it, and um, I guess it kind of just helps you have a framework of and you're not just gaining knowledge and you're like, okay, is this important? Or is this
Mhm.
kind of like not important? And sometimes you're giving importance to some random thing that was said in a lecture, but maybe it's not as important. So, understanding this or like the different aspects of knowledge and the understanding can kind of help you with that.
Ahsant, ahsant. That is a part of it. Okay, so you're right to a certain extent. Like today only, we will start talking about divisions of knowledge, presential knowledge versus acquired knowledge. So it is useful to kind of be able to classify knowledge, but there's a bigger problem here. Anybody else want to take a stab at it? If we don't talk about epistemology, there is a bigger danger that can happen. Let me try to help you guys out by thinking about this, that what is our goal in Islamic beliefs? When we discuss Allah Ta'ala, we discuss Ma'ad, we discuss Nubuwa, what are we trying to do? Brother Jawad?
Certainty, Yakin.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we want
Yaqeen about what? Go ahead, Jawad.
it's one thing to know, but it's another thing to know the right thing, right? So I think over here we're making sure that we have the right foundation so that whatever we build on is actually good for us and that we know the right thing.
Ahsant, ahsant. So we know the right thing. Sister Fatima in the chat has said we have to get knowledge from the right sources. Yes, you guys are all right. This is very correct. One thing though, another way to kind of answer this is that there is a problem that some people have fallen into where they doubt everything. There is this skepticism that is prevalent, even maybe we can say. You guys can also share your feedback if you think it's prevalent or not. But there is a type of kind of philosophical thought that says that there's no certainty in anything, or at the very least, they say there's no certainty in anything that is beyond the physical material world. So religion, God, hereafter, okay, that's nice. Respect it, but we don't know if it's true or not. There's no way of really 100% determining anything. And so that is a big problem. If we don't accept that there is a way that we can recognize knowledge, we can prove something, and as Brother Muhammad Ali said, somehow classify the different types of knowledge that we have, realize that, okay, some knowledge is certain, some knowledge is not certain. If there's no foundation in this regard, then there's no point going forward. We can't then start talking about God and the hereafter and Islam when we're just doubting everything in the first place. We don't have any kind of, as Brother Jawad said, foundation to build upon. Okay, so this is kind of why we need to first of all talk about epistemology, and inshallah, now I will tell you what are the big questions that, as we go through these next 6, 7 classes, inshallah, what are we trying to answer? Epistemology might sound like a fancy hard word. It's not that complicated, inshallah. Some of the main things we want to discuss are what you see in front of you here. That is it possible for us to recognize reality? And then especially realities that are beyond the physical world. When we talk about Allah as a being that exists, we talk about angels, we talk about, Allah being all wise, has to send messengers and a book and things like that. Is it possible to really prove that? Can we know something about the immaterial world? That is some of the fundamental questions we want to answer. And then, okay, if we have knowledge, how do we then identify what is correct knowledge and what is incorrect? When thinking is done incorrectly, that's called a fallacy. For the end of epistemology, three sessions, inshallah, we'll spend on learning about different types of fallacies, different types of errors in thinking that can happen. So this is, inshallah, an overview. I just want to make a point here that, that argument that I made, unfortunately, we do have Muslims today who say such things, that this is epistemology, philosophy, this is nothing to do with Islam. We should separate it away from Islam. The Ahlul Bayt, peace be upon them, never talked about these things. The Quran never talked about this. These are things that were introduced from non-Muslim sources. They were introduced into the Islamic world. Okay, that's true. You're right. It was something that predates Islam, but it is something that the intellect recognizes the importance of. As we just said right now, we can't really go forward and talk about existence if we don't even know if our knowledge is valuable or not. First, we have to recognize that what kind of knowledge is valuable and what kind of knowledge is not. And so, I just really want to make a point here that this kind of approach to aqa'id, this kind of approach to beliefs that is founded on a deep intellectual understanding of reality, a philosophical, you can say, understanding of reality, is something that, alhamdulillah, we have access to today, something that we need to learn today, especially as when we are being challenged, we are living with non-Muslims. If I quote Quran and Hadith to Mr. I don't know, John or whoever I'm with at school and at work who doesn't believe in God and is challenging religion, Quran and Hadith is not going to help. I need to have a logical foundation, an intellectual backing to my belief in religion. This is something that in our recent times, this great scholar of Allah, Allama Tabatabai, this close servant of Allah, he really recognized this need. And even though he was very, very well qualified in other Islamic fields like fiqh and hadith and usul, he dedicated a lot of his life to philosophy and giving that foundation to Islamic beliefs. And alhamdulillah, a lot of things are much better today in the Hausa, in the Shia community, because of the efforts of this great individual that we had, Allama Tabatabai. Let me just narrate a story about him to give you an idea of how sincere, how amazing a person he was. And inshallah, we'll go on to the epistemology discussion. It's narrated that once somebody came to him and told him that they talked to his dead father. Okay, so like they had a dream basically. There's details there, but something like this. They had a dream where they talked to his marhum father, and his father was upset with Allama Tabatabai. And Allama was like, probably taken aback, shocked. Why is my father upset with me? He said that Sayyid Muhammad Hussein, that's Allama Tabatabai, he's getting so much thawab for writing Al-Mizan, this great tafsir of the Quran, unlocking the secrets of the Quran. Allah is giving him so much reward, and he's not sending any of it to me. At that time, when Allama heard this, he cried. And he said, like, if there's any reward in what I'm doing, I give it all to the spirit, the soul of my father. And then the next time that person talked to his father again, he was very happy. He said that now that thawab, that reward has reached me. These are like awliya of Allah. He was working so hard and not even thinking about how there's like a reward for it. He probably didn't even come to his mind. He was just doing what he saw that it was his responsibility to defend Islamic beliefs intellectually. It was his responsibility to revive the subject of tafsir in the Hawza, and so many other amazing things he did in his blessed life. uh, Alhamdulillah, we are able to somehow benefit today from what he has given us and his students. Alhamdulillah, today we have many people studying these areas that are benefiting and taking forward his achievements. Anyways, inshallah, what we want to do in the upcoming sessions, this is lesson 2 that we're in today. Here is an overview of what we will be discussing. The main, you can say, meat of the discussion of epistemology will be the next 3 sessions. Today, next week, and the week after, where we're going to talk about our knowledge and where it comes from, and different types of knowledge. This next week's session is going to be really interesting, about probable knowledge. Okay, this is a mistake sometimes that Muslims who study a little bit of philosophy and logic might think that, oh, we have to be 100% certain about our beliefs. No, that's not true either. There are certain things that we are 100% certain about. There are certain things that we have a probable strong argument. And the same way that in other aspects of our life, we live our life based on, a logical strong argument, even over here in Islamic beliefs, certain aspects of it don't need to be 100% sure. Initially, we can enter religion with a strong argument about certain things, and then inshallah, as we live a life of taqwa, that will become even more and more convincing for us. And inshallah, then the 4th session will talk about how when we get knowledge from other people, sometimes we don't have a choice. We can't investigate everything ourselves. We have to learn from others. What what criteria do we want to keep in mind to make sure we're not deceived and we don't follow the wrong person? So those will be the main sessions establishing the ideas of epistemology. In lesson 5, we're going to then respond to certain fundamental questions that, okay, is our knowledge really useful? It's like we'll use what we did in lesson 2, 3, 4 to kind of come to some important conclusions that we can in fact understand reality. Certain amounts of reality are definitely within our grasp to understand and become certain, or at least become very confident about. Inshallah, that will be lesson 5. Lesson 6, 7, 8 will kind of be a fun, interesting ending to the course where we'll talk about fallacies. This is a long, deep discussion that is not fundamentally part of epistemology, but it's very much related, where we want to, because we're talking about knowledge, we're talking about thinking, we want to be able to catch mistakes in thinking. Inshallah, lesson 6, 7, 8, we will go through many different types of fallacies and use examples, inshallah, to clarify. That's the overview of what we want to do. Anybody have any questions or comments? Otherwise, inshallah, we can get started with the main content of today's lesson. Okay. Initially, I'm going to give you guys a few different divisions of knowledge, and then inshallah, we'll do an activity to make sure it's understood clearly. The first important division you can see in these 2 photos in front of you, and that is this idea that knowledge is either like the first picture when you're in pain and you have knowledge of that pain, or it's something like the second where there's some image in your mind. If you look at that second photo, you might not really be able to tell what is it. You don't really know what it is. It's just a shape that looks a bit strange and could be, I don't know, some electric thing, or could be some random tower. What is the division here? The division is of presential knowledge versus, in Arabic we would call this ilm huduri, something that is directly there. That pain, when you experience that pain, there is no intermediary, there is no doubt. That presential knowledge, that pain is right there in your soul. You are experiencing that pain. Okay, you bumped into something, go back, the person's hand is hurting them. Maybe they injured themselves, maybe they hit something. Whatever is the case, they have that pain right there in their soul. As opposed to that, the second example was something where, no, there is an intermediary. You're looking at something and you have a picture of it in your mind. And there is that we would call this in Arabic ilm husuli. This is acquired knowledge. Maybe we would call it conceptual knowledge. There is a mental image. There is me as the knower. There is that mental image that is the knowledge. And then there is a third thing that is the real tower or whatever. The image in my mind is pointing to that exterior reality. Whereas in the first case, ilm huduri, there were just two things. There was the pain and there was me that feels the pain. There's no third thing, there's no intermediary. Inshallah, I want you guys to think about this a bit more, come up with your own examples. But just before we do that, I'll give you one more division. Okay, so here in the slide in front of you, there is a little bit more, some more examples. Knowledge of myself, knowledge of my states, that's all presential. It's right there in my soul. As opposed to that, the intermediary one, the acquired knowledge, yeah, okay, so we don't have any more examples here on the side. That's good. I want you guys to come up with examples. One final division before we kind of do an activity here is that this acquired knowledge, even in the subject of logic, we divide it into two different types. This is useful to know that sometimes that mental concept I have, that knowledge I have, is just a concept. It's not an affirmation. Okay, what's the difference here? When you can make a complete sentence, like a jumla khabariya, how do you translate that? Like an informative sentence, that is an affirmation. If I say Jawad is in this class, if I say God exists, that is an affirmation which we can now attribute truth or falsehood to that affirmation. Again, in Arabic, if you want to know, the term for that is tasdeeq. Whereas there is another type of knowledge. Both of these are types of knowledge that are in our mind. Both of these are acquired knowledge. The other one is just a concept. It's not something that we are making a claim about reality. Okay, so for example, that's called tasawwur. Affirmation in Arabic is called tasdeeq, whereas the conceptual knowledge is called tasawwur. So for example, the concept of who a human being is, or any other such concept. You see, affirmations are made up of concepts. Even if you take any kind of sentence that is not a complete informative sentence, let's say you were to say, oh, I wish I were in Karbala right now. Or let's say you were to, give a command, I want you to pray namaz. All of those kind of sentences are also just considered conceptual knowledge. It's still not an affirmation about reality. So this is a division. First of all, we divided knowledge into two types, presential knowledge versus acquired knowledge. And then acquired knowledge, we divided it again, once more, into, again, concepts versus affirmations. Yeah, I want you guys to try to open this up a little bit, think about this a little bit more. Take a few minutes. You can even talk to your brother, your sister, anybody else in the class, and try to come up with more examples. I want to see if, inshallah, the concept is clear. Come up with an example of what is presential knowledge and prove to me why it's presential, not conceptual. Come up with an example of conceptual knowledge or acquired knowledge, as we called it, and why it's acquired. See if you can even come up with examples which are tricky, which at first glance you might think it's presential, but no, when you think about it more, you realize no, it's not presential, it is actually acquired. And then inshallah, for acquired knowledge, again, come up with a few examples of concepts versus affirmations. If everybody can come up with 2-3 different examples of each of these, that would be great. Yes, Sister Huda?
Assalamu alaikum. I
Alaikum
had
salam.
a clarifying question. So,
Sure.
علم الحضوري versus علم الحصولي, so acquired versus presential. Is the difference that one, the presential would have only 2 components and the other has 3? Is that kind of the category to differentiate between the two, or does it?
Yeah, I think that is a clear explanation of that would divide the two of them.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Inshallah, I'll give you guys a couple of minutes and then I'll circle back and ask you to share your thoughts, inshallah. If anybody's ready to share, inshallah, bismillah, you can go ahead and give your examples.
I was wondering if perhaps examples like when you're thirsty, you know you have to drink water, or when you are hungry, or when you are sleepy, you need to sleep. That's something that, you know, it's a definite knowledge. Would that come under the first category?
Yeah, yeah. So just the knowledge of the fact that you're hungry. When you're feeling that hunger, you know you're hungry. That's definitely a good example of presential knowledge. Yes, Brother Masood?
Yeah, I think Shaykhna, if for ilm huduri, would it be meeting somebody directly? So I get to know you directly. I've met you. I engaged with you. And then ilm hasuli is I ask somebody about you. So that person tells me about you. So I meet you through a medium. So would that be ilm hasuli?
It's a good
Or
question.
is that conceptual knowledge?
The examples that are given for ilm huduri are more this aspect of your internal sense of what you recognize within your soul. So it's there with you.
Mhm.
Now, when you meet somebody else, I don't think it would count as ilm huduri because at the end of the day, like, what is the knowledge that you're talking about? We were talking about some knowledge that you have. If it is the picture of the person that you're looking at or the sound of their voice, it's still something that is knowledge that is now ilm husuli in your mind that you have. Unless
Yeah,
there is a
yeah.
direct connection to the other person. Yeah.
Yeah. So the second example I gave, I am referring
Mhm.
it to be al-mahsuli because there's a
Okay.
medium. So I haven't met you
Sure.
directly.
Sure.
That person is presenting certain characteristics about you to me. And so I'm forming an image about you now.
Right, right. But even when you're looking at somebody live, at the end of the day, it's still you're looking at them and then you're developing because the picture of their face is somehow coming into your mind and there is that intermediary there. So I don't think it's something that inshallah I will talk to some people and get back. It's something interesting to think about. But as far as I'm aware right now, it's still ilm husuli when you meet that person. The examples that are given of ilm huduri are when something is there in your soul, that like hunger, that pain, that other examples
Mm.
maybe people will give us. Okay,
Okay.
inshallah, it's a good question. I will take it back. I will. It's actually an interesting thing. So when you're in front of the person, is there a level of ilm huduri there? Like what aspect of knowledge do you have that is without intermediary? I think it's still all with an intermediary. No?
So when they say meeting God, like
Meeting God is
experiencing
different.
God.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Meeting God is
that of
different.
course is internal and
Yeah. That's more like your soul has actually directly, maybe for certain, pious individuals, their soul has somehow directly experienced some reality.
but that's al-mahduri.
That should be al-Mahduri, I think, yeah.
Okay.
How about Brother Mahir?
Actually, I had a question.
Uh-huh.
Well, I'm trying to think of examples of conceptual knowledge, but the first thing that came to mind was our definition of good and evil, because on the Islamic side, we know that our fitra will tell us what's good and what's evil to some extent, but also like just our upbringing, learn to be good and evil. Would that count as conceptual knowledge under acquired knowledge? Because you kind of acquire it from someone else, right?
So you said that our fitra tells us what is good and evil, and then you said something else I didn't catch, that sometimes we're taught it. Is that what you said?
To like to some extent tells us what's good and evil. It would count as conceptual knowledge, or is it affirmational in that this is good and this is evil and this is right and this is wrong?
Yeah. So overall, yeah, no, it's definitely a concept. It's something that's in your mind, and yeah, it would be the idea of what is good, the idea of what is evil. It would be a concept. It would be a tasawwur. It wouldn't be an affirmation. And yeah, so inshallah, we're now, after this is finished, we're going to talk about where these concepts come from. And as you mentioned, there are certain concepts that are already there. We don't need to be taught them. We don't need to think about them. They're very obvious. They're self-evident. Maybe this would be one of those. So yeah, Ahsan, that's a good example of acquired knowledge that is a concept, good and evil. Brother Zain, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I also have like a maybe follow-up comment question from what Sister Huda mentioned, in that is Huduri, where there's like a direct link between the observed and observer, whereas for the Usuli there's an intermediary. Can you look at it from another perspective, where you can define Huduri knowledge as something that cannot be corrupted by the presence of intermediary, whereas the second one, there's all a chance if you're not trained, where you can there can be the knowledge can be corrupted in some way.
Yeah. Exactly. And Brother Masood, this goes back to your example of when you meet somebody, you can still make a mistake because there is a concept of that person that's coming into your mind, and that's how you know. Like, let's say you're talking to me, Brother Masood, I'm hearing what you're saying, and it's coming into my mind, and then I have that knowledge of what you just said. But your words or your image is not there in my soul directly. The real image of who you are is not there in my soul. So there's still three things, right? There's you, my knowledge, and me. Whereas with the pain, with the hunger, with other al-huduri, there's no room for doubt, as Brother Zain just said. It's always going to be correct. It's something that is there in your soul. The reality of what it is there in your soul. Sister Huda, did you want to give some examples? You're muted, Sister Huda.
Sorry.
No problem.
I think an example of presential knowledge. So pain, feeling hunger, feeling sleepy, feeling tired. This is something that I can always say that is to be true because I am the one feeling it. Can I also say things like things that I sense? For example, this water is hot or this ice is cold. Would that be presential knowledge as well? Or
Um,
or is that dependent on my sense of touch, which means intermediary?
yeah, that's my understanding. That's similar to what Brother Masood's question was, that now you're using your senses to get that knowledge. So it's going to be a self-evident. Inshallah, we're going to talk right now about where our knowledge comes from. It's something that's very obvious. You don't need to think about it. You don't need to deduce it, infer it, but it's still acquired knowledge. Because the reality of that cold ice is not there in your soul. It's something that you are getting a concept of as you touch it. Okay. Inshallah, I hope that was a useful and beneficial discussion. Brother Muhammad Ali also put in the chat that pain definitely is going to be something that is presential knowledge, and yeah, you don't need to be taught it for sure. Although that's not the differentiating factor between presential versus acquired is not whether you needed to be taught it. Even certain acquired knowledge, like examples of things that you sense, that's acquired knowledge that nobody needs to teach you. Okay, so the differentiation is not. The Muhammad Hadi Datu, for an example for acquired knowledge, knowing that there are millions of galaxies in the universe. Definitely. That would be something that's not there in your soul. It's not presential. It's a piece of knowledge that you have in your mind, acquired husuli knowledge. Okay. The next thing that I wanted to now mention, and brothers, sisters, to a certain extent, these discussions here, if they seem dry, it's because they are dry. They are the foundation that we will need later on. But later on, inshallah, if you stay with this next classes and we talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we'll talk about the fitrah and different concepts. We'll need to come back to some of these concepts and differentiate and talk about ilm huduri, ilm husuli. So right now we're just kind of laying the foundation. Okay, so bear with me. Um, Next point that's really, really important, and the whole subject of logic comes out of this, is that the husuli knowledge that we have, as we called it, acquired knowledge we have, both the concepts and the affirmations, they are of two types. Some of them are really obvious. They're self-evident. Nobody needs to think about them to prove them. Okay, so there's examples we'll look at right now. But then there are other examples of acquired knowledge, ilm husuli, that no, there is a process where you need to somehow infer it, deduce it. You take existing knowledge you have and you build on it. You put it together and you come up with a new conclusion that is your result. This is where the subject of logic becomes important. Okay, logic or ilm al-mantiq, the Aristotelian logic I'm talking about, like not maybe some of the modern fields of logic in the West, but the older logic that even in the Western world was taught, or we call it mantiq in Arabic. That is teaching you how to put knowledge together in your mind to correctly come up with a conclusion. Your mind is like a machine, which if you give it certain input, it gives certain output. Okay, so if you give it correct input knowledge, that's a big point, by the way. That doesn't always happen. If you give it correct input knowledge, using the principles of logic, it can put those knowledge pieces together and come up with a correct conclusion. Let me give you an example. Imagine a building is a weak building. That building could be weak because of one of two reasons. Sometimes the material, the wood, the metal, whatever was used to build the building was not good quality. But sometimes, no, the material was good, but it wasn't assembled in a good way. It wasn't connected together in a strong way to make a strong, good building. The idea of the subject of logic is that idea of putting the material together correctly. That logic, Aristotelian logic, is teaching us how to, what the rules of a syllogism are. We'll talk a little bit about syllogism. The idea of how, if I have pieces of knowledge that I'm now combining, what do I need to keep in mind that I don't make a mistake? And any conclusion that I derive is a correct conclusion. This is a very powerful concept. This is what scholars of mantiq in the Muslim world have tried to show, that a lot of our thinking, if we open it up, it goes back to these syllogisms and this logical process, step by step. I'm doing one logical deduction and then another deduction and then a third deduction. I might not realize it, but there's a lot of things happening in my mind that if I try to adhere to logical principles, I can fix mistakes in thinking. Some of the people who have attacked logic and said logic is not very useful, they also have a point, by the way. Their point is that the mistakes in thinking are not just because of to use my example of a building, it's not just because of assembling the building wrongly. Sometimes mistakes in thinking go back to your initial knowledge that you started with. You assumed something incorrectly. You followed somebody who you shouldn't have followed. And then you went forward with that and you thought about it more and more, and you built on that wrong foundation and you came up with a wrong conclusion. Here, the problem was not because of anything logic could help you with. Here, the problem was because your initial knowledge was not correct. Okay, so knowledge is, again, to kind of this really important point I want to make is that knowledge is a machine. Both concepts and affirmations can kind of go through this machine, and you can work on it, think, develop, add more knowledge, and come up with conclusions. Some examples of self-evident knowledge, knowledge that doesn't require thinking, knowledge that's very obvious. These are, for example, what we sense, our five senses, something we look at. Okay, if I see the sun outside, nobody needs to tell me that, okay, let's prove that the sun is there. I can see the sun. It's obvious to me. I don't need to think about it. Or internal knowledge about our feelings, about our pain. But wait a second, I thought we're talking about husuli knowledge. Wasn't that huduri knowledge? There's a point here that I can remember my pain. I can go think about my pain. And if I'm thinking about it, now it has become ilm husuli. It's no longer me and my pain, that huduri relationship. It's now me thinking about that pain that I was or even am experiencing. So again, if it's thoughts about my feelings in a ilm husuli sense, it's obvious. Nobody needs to think about that, deduce it, prove it. It's very clear. Beyond that, this is something that, philosophers who want to deny the immaterial world and just focus on the physical, material empiricism, they might not appreciate this third category right here. That beyond that, there are certain things that the mind recognizes without thinking, and we know it's 100% true. It's just an intellectual reality that if I think about it, it's obvious. I don't even need to think about it. I just, if it comes to my mind, I know it's definitely true. These are the foundations of philosophy, the foundations of thought, that we have to take back our thought to these initial foundations and then check that are they correct or not. So, for example, every one of us knows that something cannot exist and not exist at the same time. Okay, this is called the law of non-contradiction. This book that I have in front of me, you can't see it because of like the background I have. Oh, I should remove that background. That's not an academy. This is some other institution I'm with. Okay, so this book right now, this book right here, it cannot both exist and not exist at the same time. Right? That's something very obvious. We don't need to think about it. We don't need to prove it. We all recognize it. But how do we know it? The idea of the book not existing is not something I have experienced and, come to know based on experience. It's just an intellectual truth that I know, that is very clear to my aql, to my intellect. Right? So like that, there are certain fundamentals that my mind just knows without even having to experience it. If I lived in a dark room all my life, I could just close my eyes, and I don't need to. If I'm in the dark, I don't need to close my eyes. I could just with my mind appreciate certain things about reality without having to experience it. Okay, so these are the self-evident, in Arabic we would say badihiyat, that our thinking develops from these initially. Okay. As opposed to that, then there are other pieces of knowledge that no, they're not badihi. They require thought. They need to be concluded, proven. I need to put different pieces of knowledge together and then come up with that understanding. This applies, like I said, to both concepts and affirmations. Yes, Sister Huda?
Thank you, Sheikh. So you said some philosophers who do not put too much weight into the immaterial world or concept of that, they would
Mhm.
say that this book may be existing and not existing at the same time because we have not experienced not existence. For that reason, we cannot 100%
As
say that. Is that kind of the argument?
Muslim philosophers are trying to say that, look, everybody lives their life recognizing certain realities, that something cannot exist and not exist at the same time. Nobody lives their life otherwise, right? So then that should bring us to this reality that I just mentioned, that our intellect can appreciate certain things even though we haven't experienced it. So this idea, I think, is called empiricism, that the only reality are things that we can sense with our five senses. That is incorrect.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
No problem. Okay. And so the last thing, inshallah, we'll end with today, and I'll try to come up with some good homework assignments that make you think more about syllogisms, is that, inshallah, next week we'll talk about forms of knowledge that are not 100% certain, and how we have to live our life at times with knowledge that is very likely. For example, all of you guys came to class today, even though it wasn't 100% sure that your teacher was going to be here, right? We live our life not just based on 100% certain realities. Okay, but syllogisms, this way of deducting that you can see examples of on the slide in front of you, this is 100% sure. This is something that if the input knowledge that you give it is correct, there's no doubt about if the syllogism is done correctly according to the laws of logic, there's absolutely no doubt in the conclusion. So here you can put together pieces of knowledge, that machine that I was telling you, our mind is a machine. You can put together pieces of knowledge and extract a conclusion that is 100% certain. Some simple examples. This is water. All water flows. So far I have two different pieces of knowledge, but there's a common point here. They're both talking about water. So I can combine them and extract a third new piece of knowledge, remove water, and say that this thing flows. So I was pointing at water and saying this is water, water flows. Now I can say this flows. Like that, inshallah, you can, come up with lots of other syllogisms. And like I said, inshallah, I'll try to give you a homework assignment. But the idea is this, that this is a way of coming up with 100% certain conclusion. So now if we could give, as we will, inshallah, if we could give arguments for the proof of God that are based on syllogisms, and the initial knowledge was 100% certain knowledge, then we can now put forward 100% certain argument for the existence of God. That is using syllogisms that go back to very self-evident realities. Very, very quickly, I'll just go through one. You probably know this, that one of the famous arguments for the existence of God is the cosmological argument. It goes something like this, that um, maybe it needs a bit more time to explain, but it says that the beings can either be necessary or contingent. And if there is contingent beings, then there needs to have been a necessary being that initially started, that gave existence to those contingent beings. They couldn't all have just come about themselves. Right? That's, if we open that up, we should be able to open that up as a series of syllogisms that is rooted in some very self-evident pieces of knowledge that are very, very obvious. And if we can, which we should be able to, then that is a 100% solid proof. Okay? Another example of a piece of knowledge, let's say I were to give you isosceles triangle. Isosceles triangle means two of the sides are the same length. And then I tell you that one of the angles is 40 degrees. Right away you can determine, based on this piece of knowledge, you can put together some other rules that, okay, a triangle has to have a total of 180 degrees, and if it's isosceles, that means the other two angles have to be the same number. So then you find out that they have to be both 70 degrees. Okay, so it's this idea of how you can make a syllogism based on knowledge that you already knew from before. You can conclude a kind of new piece of knowledge. This is a very high level overview, but a very important kind of discussion that we went through today. That brings us to the end, inshallah, of what we wanted to talk about today. The really important point that we want to take away from this is that when we hear an argument, when we hear something being said, we can try to analyze it logically. We can try to break it down into the syllogisms that it's made up of. We can try to see what are the initial assumptions that this argument is based on. Are those initial assumptions strong or not? And then there's a process that was, the thought that went through to develop the argument by figuring out if the initial knowledge was correct and if the process was correct, we can determine that the argument is a very strong argument or not, inshallah. I'll end it with that. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to stick around. And like I said, inshallah, I'll try to give you a homework assignment that opens this up a little bit more and makes you think more about syllogisms with examples of syllogisms, inshallah. Brother Zain, good.
Sheikh, thank you so much for your time. I feel like I don't really understand the tasawwur as a form of an acquired knowledge. Maybe it's just me and we can take it offline, but kind of the examples that were given in the reading, like there were either like desires, like, oh, I wish I could always act according to God's pleasure, or some concepts like water, a person named Ali, or some statements that seem to be false, like a line interacting with a parallel line. And like from the word, it seems like, at least in Urdu, we would think of tasawwur as like something to do with imagination. So could you elaborate on that a little bit? Like, are we thinking of like a statement like, oh, like, it's nighttime in Pakistan right now, so my father is probably sleeping? Is that kind of thing, which I can't verify? Or is it more hypothetical, like, oh, like unicorns have wings? Can you elaborate on that?
If it's a complete sentence which can be said that it's true or false, then it's an affirmation. Everything else is a conception. But there is, at times, there's a process of thought to develop concepts. For example, you looked at all these human beings when you were a child and you developed the idea of what is a human being. There is a concept, we can define that and say that, okay, a human being is somebody that has these kind of characteristics. So we can somehow, open that up. Our concepts in our mind are self-evident at times, and at times, no, they need an explanation, they need a definition. Um, but yeah, in the mantiq, in the subject of mantiq, they make this broad division that all ilm husuli is either tasawwur or tasdeeq. So anything that is not tasdeeq is then grouped in the category of tasawwur. Yeah, it's something that it's just a concept in our mind, but then you're right, even the other things are not just simple concepts. They're, I don't know, like a sentence that says, "Oh, I wish this," or "do this," or in Arabic we call it insha, I think is the word. There's the terminology here. A lot of this subject of logic is, a terminology that we will then use later on in further discussions of beliefs and philosophy. Sister Huda, go ahead.
Yeah, I wonder if affirmations can ever be built upon to come up with concepts. Like that's probably more common than vice versa. Like the relationship between tasawwur and tasdiq. Can one be built upon the other? Or is it just one
Definitely,
more?
no. Tasdeeq comprises of tasawwurat. So to make an affirmation, you are making a claim about certain concepts. God exists. So you have an idea of God and have an idea of what it means to exist. And now I'm making an affirmation that God exists. Yeah? That makes sense?
But you can't do vice versa.
So
You
I
can't
think I was getting
start with
my internet
affirmation.
became unstable. So you can do vice versa. My internet became unstable for a moment there. I think I may have got
Yeah,
cut off, but you heard
I
what I
was
said, right? Yeah.
able to hear you a little bit, but
Okay.
I was able to understand. Can it be vice versa? Can I start with a
Tasdeeq.
jumlat khabar and then build concepts on top of that? I think I can, right?
I guess you
Is
can. Why
tasdeeq
not?
always
Maybe you
a
could say like
conclusion then? I guess that's what I'm asking.
is tasdeeq all
Is the affirmation always a conclusion? Can you have these concepts, you talk about them or you present them, and then you're always going to come up with an affirmation, like a conclusion?
I'm not sure, but I assume that you could wrap a tasdeeq in a tasawwur and say, for example, oh, I wish I said this jumla khabariyah. Right? So now overall, what are you saying? The I wish means that it's a tasawwur, it's not a tasdeeq, but you've inserted a sentence, complete sentence in there. So I think you can. Why not?
I see. Okay, thanks.
No problem. Okay, guys. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala tahirin. Thank you all for your time. We can leave it at that, inshallah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sheikh.
Um,
في أمان الله.
Thank you, Sheikh.